David, how you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Doing very well. Doing very well. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. Yes. Is it Tuesday? Yes, it is.
That's what they say. So you're preparing for a show in Canada at the moment.
I'm preparing for a show in Canada, kind of close to Georgian Bay. I am at the estate of a collector of mine who I kind of connected with last year, and then we had kind of discussed ways of connecting more, and he's been wanting to set up a foundation. So in the winter he invited me up here to work on the show I did in Rome and to start painting, basically. And he really gave me the opportunity to dive into painting, and which I had been really like pushing off, but yeah, it was good. And to do really abstract works, and get into color. Really, like, color exploded into my work, and now I'm back up here and working on paintings for the show I'm doing at Mott Projects in early October 7th, and then the Mott Projects is a project space and kind of curatorial project of the artist Eric Sommer, who's a Brooklyn-based painter and artist, and he opened a space kind of in his barn, kind of in Catskill, New York. So it's about 40 minutes north of the city, and there's a lot of like artists and people living around. It's very close to Hudson, New York. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of big artist community and collector community and all that kind of stuff. People who are like sick of New York, they go up there, I guess. So yeah, doing that show beginning of October, and I've just been really like diving into the work for that show, kind of like I did for the beginning of the year, but this has been kind of building up, this work. It's been building up from a number of studies and that I've been working on over the course of a number of years, actually, but that has been getting more and more prominent in my daily practice, and has really started to kind of define, or at least started to become a big part of my daily experience and conversation.
Right. No, I mean, since we started talking about this particular show, you have definitely been, I would say, fully engaged in a process, or just like a journey of some various checkpoints. Physically, you've gone from Berlin to Toronto. Now you're in Muskoka, and you're eventually going to make your way to the Catskills, like you said. But you also mentioned that this show itself is sort of you turning away from stuff that's, from an art making standpoint, maybe more critical, conceptual, minimal art making, and moving more towards a practice that's grounded in method, technique, and study.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that the show is one that I'm really excited about, and also like nervous about. Probably the most nervous about a show I've ever been, because for me it's like a real, like, it's a marker, it's a signal for me of like that. Yeah, I have this history as a more conceptual, minimal, I'd say critical thinking artist, and this show, like, a lot of shows and a lot of art, it's always kind of grounded in ideas and concepts, and maybe that's unavoidable. It's like, maybe part of what I'm doing in my work now is to see is like, can you make art without those things? And can it be more grounded in maybe a way of living, or like a philosophical approach to existing? And so the show, what I've been kind of saying is like, there is no, I don't know, concept for the show. It's not like there's some big idea that it's grounded in, other than my message being like that I'm alive, and living demands creativity, and making art and painting has been a big part of my experience of survival and living, and that journey just continues, and it just kind of gets wider and more deeper as I explore that side of what it means to be alive. And for me, art has always been this tool for engaging in the world around me. Because admittedly, I've always been maybe I've it, I've been slow in understanding myself and life and the world that I exist in. And art was from a very young age this kind of lens or way of interacting, almost like another sense, like touching or seeing, almost like combining all those together. And it's been part of my experience of using my senses, the phenomena of my senses and the phenomena of this external world, or what I perceive it as external world, and how that processes through me. And I think for most of my practice, that's always been abstracted or grounded, like I said, in ideas or concepts, or grounded in maybe, especially I think informed by technology and what that means, and wanted to be a part of that conversation of the influence of technology, I guess, on art and life. But I think for me, this work now, like maybe that those parts of my work are always going to be there on some level. Like I think it's unavoidable in the age of information that we live in. But maybe for me, it's just a given. It's like, okay, that's just normal, but what else, you know? And so this work for me is like that desire for something else.
You've called this effort, or I should say desire or focus, as a self-confessional.
Right. Yeah. Well, perhaps that's also part of my story, is like, I mean, I don't know what being a self-taught painter necessarily means. I mean, I have an arts education. I'm pursuing an arts education. But no, I never did like a formal training in painting or anything like that. I've taken on a mentor named Mark Emblem, who I know from Berlin, and he studied with Michael Craig Martin and the YBAs and all that stuff. And he's very like grounded in the philosophy of what painting means. And so for him, he never like was like, all right, this is how you use a brush, or this is how you mix colors, or blah, blah. He was really trying to encourage like a self-leadership in it. And so that evolved in kind of, I don't know, some sort of self-taught painting. Now, of course, with the age of technology, you can look online like, oh, how do I paint like this painter, blah, 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 or that painter. And then also my mother's a painter. And so I've done a lot of sitting and a lot of drawing with my mom. So that's really like been influential on me. And in maybe in some ways that experience, that self-taught teaching or self-journey, and the inclusion of personal, intimate people in my life has, you know, brought me to this point in painting or in my work that is very exposing for me. It leaves me in a vulnerable position in terms of like, this is where I'm at in painting, like and that's it. Like there's no magic here or something, like, if that makes sense.
Well, I don't know. I would maybe push back on you, man. But
okay. Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, like you and I were discussing earlier, like, you know, you've talked about having contemplated Hegel's, you know, born of the spirit, or rather the being born of the spirit and yet being born again, because
Right.
you're being propelled to this precipice of being self-revealing
Right.
and following up an effort that, you know, I went and kind of saw and really experienced the real McCoy in Rome with that white noise, and at the same time, this is a bit of a departure from that,
Mm.
and you've described it again as also just like a moment where you're sort of in parallel thinking about the great poets answering a certain kind of call.
Mm.
And, you know, I think that there's a lot of magic in that for sure.
Yeah, I guess when we think about magic, we're always thinking about, or one would think about illusion or sleights of hand. And I suppose maybe true magic has more to do with I hate to use the word like alchemy. Like I think that that word has been kind of obscured by Jungian thinking, where we're kind of associating alchemy with this process of consciousness. I actually believe that the alchemists were trying to transmute metals, but um, I think that there is something in there that is of magic, of like transformation and change, and then existing as things are, living naturally, and trying to work towards that level of maybe self-acceptance or authenticity, and
Right.
through that something emerges, or you know, one's genius can be heard more clearly in the mind of the artist or the actant on that idea, on that message being kind of carried through. I know it's a bit abstract, but it's a lot. It's a lot grounded in like I think in like Hegel. I think that kind of line of like born of the spirit and born again, to me, it says a lot about phenomenology and things having a spirit, and through the experience of being one in the world and engaging with that, new life emerges again. And so I don't know, I see observational art and what I'm trying to do with my work as being engaging with my understanding, or my place in that understanding of born of the spirit and born again, and which I think, you know, really relates back to antiquity. I think.
Well, sure. And I mean, you know, you being a very steady, you know, practitioner of Zen, you know, I think that in terms of talking about an evolution of the persona, an evolution of the voice that's within, and when that evolution or movement takes place and you've propelled yourself forward, I think that there is also this kind of loyalty to the honesty that you have in that new moment, which is where you're at now.
Yeah, and I think the moment I'm in now, I could kind of relate it back to maybe my message. My message being like, you know, the message is a way of living, and that is like just being a human living in the world. And so this is like sharing my enjoyment of living with others, and maybe in a way that kind of relates to that idea of like working like a poet or a musician, like trying to answer this call within oneself to create something that is from within, but then, like, again, born of the spirit and born again, it's about being alive. um, so there's this circular process, and in Zen there's this idea of like non-being and non-dualism, and and there's a great quote from the Shobogenzu about you know, I can't remember the exact sutra, but it's something like the light that shines between the the white hairs of the eyelash illuminate 3,000 worlds. And I guess you can kind of think about that as like the same light that is shining through all things, even the smallest, most minuscule thing, is the same light that everyone here, everyone you've ever known and will ever meet is illuminated their life. And so in that way, it's like 3,000 worlds, or it could be 7 billion worlds. Like each consciousness itself is a universe, and all of us, although we are universes in ourselves, we're also sharing the experience of universe. And so illumination is shining that light between two worlds, both lived and shared. And it's kind of something like that. Like,
no, I understand. We've talked a lot about as well, like in this spirit of acceptance and you sharing space quite literally at the moment, in this sort of, place that you're in, focusing on the show, sharing space with these new works, and having a relationship with these new works as if they were people. Right. And understanding the fact that there are complexities that we know about, and also don't know about, the W know and W don't know in others. And that kind of acceptance in terms of being amongst that and just sort of seeing that, staring it in the eyes, so to speak, the same way that you would be staring at one of your works as it's sort of taking shape.
Right. And yeah, and I guess what I think about with that idea of like, I think when you're painting, you don't, I don't believe one really understands that until they start to paint, is that you're forming this relationship, and the painting is always talking to you and telling you things, and becoming, and at some point you, the person, the David that is there painting, steps aside almost. It's like, I'm no longer the main character in my life. What's the main characters in the story here are is the painting, the becoming, and the thing in which becoming goes through. And so there's a kind of searching happening for like love, grace, transcendence, and I think that's all tied in with compassion. And so when the painting gets to a point where it says, no, stop working on me, stop it. And even if there's things in it that are, there's a tension that creates in me. It's like, oh, it could be this, it could be that. And that for me is an exciting part of art, the tension that creates, where like you see it. I think the most kind of hard-edged example is like, people go into a museum, they're like, oh, that's garbage. Oh, I like that. That's garbage. And it's like, that's the razor's edge being created. And I think like good art creates a razor's edge, and the tension that is created there. I'm not saying necessarily that I'm making good art, but that's something that speaks to me, and I suppose is part of the searching I'm doing, because for me, compassion is not just about like being a nice person. It's about seeing that not everything is about me, and that there's other experiences, and that relationship I'm creating with the painting has created a new experience. And what is it saying to me? And can I accept it as it is? And that's the challenge, I think. A lot of artists talk about like, when do you know a painting is finished? And I think every artist has a different approach to that. And for me, it's this conversation that forms.
And the title of the show itself.
Right. Still alive. Yeah.
So it's very emblematic of this spirit where,
Right. Yeah.
like, your life force coming through these works living not necessarily at odds with these works, but at the same time, you know, and but you know, not maybe necessarily peacefully coexisting either. There's a wrangling effort happening, certainly on your side, I would imagine, and yet, like you said, having that level of compassion for yourself and where you're at, and then knowing that moment where you're like, okay, time to move on to the next work within this show.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that when I say like, this is where I'm at with painting, it's also like saying like, this is at where I'm at with this process of self-acceptance, because I'm not altruistic. I'm just another person in the world. I'm full of flaws like everybody else. And I'm not, and I still struggle with this judgment of like of shoulds and woulds and coulds about where I am now in the world versus the anxiety I have about the future, and some of the sadness I feel about my past. And so that attempt to try to be in the present is an everyday engagement. It's not just something that can be fixed and it's settled. It's something that needs to be practiced, and I think like painting is a practice. It's a spiritual practice.
And on that note, you've done a lot of the study for this show in the outdoors, in nature, taking in the landscapes of a whole number of different nations and geographies. And, you know, throughout the period of preparation that you've put in, you've often mentioned just the energy or the aura of these sketches or in the moment drawings that you're doing, you know, of the world as it was when you were experiencing it. And these works now are reflecting that to a huge extent, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always going to be limitations set too. I mean, and one of the reasons why I think that I use landscape or observational or still life or things like this is because these are methods of creating that or engaging with the world and making art that they have a tradition to them. So I don't need to explain that. It's already understood. And that has given me a lot of freedom to not have to explain what exactly that is about. And like it's understood in that level. So that I kind of see that as like just like the Zen master uses the ink and does the circle. It's like for me, it's like I don't have to think about why the still life is important. I know that already. It's just a form, it's a tradition. And so I kind of like take that with me and make it a part of my living experience and some of the things that excite me and build new conversations within me and the world around me. And so like when I go on hikes, or I'm trying to do that more, even things that encourage me to keep living, that encourage me to get up every day. And so I've kind of like done that with watercolors and which I really love, and then try to translate that into oils, or you know, eventually do more like oil plein air in this traditional sense. But then I have all these old chalk pastels my mother gave me, and then I've just been like taking those with me because it's even easier. I just have to bring a stack of paper, and I have a limited color set, and then I just fill in the gaps. If is not the exact thing, it's okay. I don't have to make it perfect. And I think nature is very forgiving in a way. Like if I don't sketch a tree exactly as it is, it's not going to come over and feel bad about it when it sees that. Or does it see it as I do? Of course not. It's another thing, or existing thing, existing consciousness, or part of consciousness. But with people, with portrait and things like that, maybe that's something I'm leading to. I've been doing more things like that on the side. So when I'm engaging with subjects that are non-human, that are nature, I don't have to explain a lot of why. And like I was kind of saying, it's grounded in this tradition. So there's a form to it that can just help, that allows an artist to focus maybe more on craft, or more on, like I said, method, technique, study. So it becomes studying, it becomes practice. And I think portraiture is also the same. And as I was kind of saying, like I've been kind of playing more with portraiture, and of people or of animals too. And then also using a lot of classical studies of it when I was in Rome, for instance, or in Greece, taking lots of pictures and doing a lot. In 2020, I was doing a lot of little sketches of sculptures and images I was seeing of things from the past, and they were getting abstracted, or they're being more rendered. So it was studying also, and I'm kind of going to be exploring that more. But where I'm at now is more like this kind of abstracted nature experience, and I guess using the process that I'm doing, where it's like I'm doing kind of a 2-stage of taking it to oil, where maybe I'm doing a watercolor or a sketch or a pastel or something like that, and then bringing it over to oil. There's going to be this natural abstraction that takes place, and then filling in the gaps, and the painting starts to talk to me and says different things, and then I'm trying to maybe meet that conversation or not, or accept it or not, and things like that. And that's been kind of maybe emblematic of my journey as an artist, of like that I've always been, and maybe this is something that frustrates some people, that which I try not to think about as much as I used to, but that maybe is confusing, is like I have changed my work a lot, and it's been a part of my journey as an artist and a person to grow and to transform, and my work is reflecting that. And so just like going from one medium to another, I'm also going from one practice to another. And that's been a part of my story as a person and as an artist, is like, and because art has always been there for me and has been a part of my my way of living, and being one of the things that helps me to live, that means that the work has to grow, it has to evolve, and become more a part of me, become more about, and becoming more a part of me means becoming more about being alive. And so that's why this work has a lot of life in it, or it's coming from living. And so this idea of like still alive is of course like a play on words, but then also this acknowledgement of my existence, and of my self-consciousness, and maybe that has more meaning to it than I understand. And so to be still alive says a lot of things. It says a lot of things about my experience maybe as a living being, and says a lot about the times that we live in, that being alive is confusing and full of winding corners and many corridors and mirrored halls, and it's and perhaps nature, I find, spiritual and sanctuary for that, and because it's not so wound up in this obsessive self-conscious or self-obsession that I think is emblematic of the age that we live in, which could be reflected a lot in former times, former catastrophes of civilization. And but I think the difference between now and then is now there's so many people in the world, there's so much access to information and different ways of living from the past and from present, that I have a lot more hope. And so Still Alive for me is a show about hope, and it's I don't know, a show about being alive, and a show about that living matters, and that being alive is important, and that life is precious.
There's so much, reading a lot of the words that you've shared and the conversations that we've had leading up to this point. It takes a lot of courage to move away from something that is the familiar. And, like, I don't know how many people I've known throughout my life who have proudly told me that they're creatures of comfort. And I'm not saying that being a creature of comfort is something that we should be trying to knock. We can't knock folks that want to be comfortable, and yet at the same time, I think that in the continual effort to create and to, like you said, the desire to be a part of the world is, and how that manifests itself for somebody who's creating something that the world, the exterior world beyond you, is going to be experiencing. They're going to be experiencing you, but in a way where you are marching actually towards some of the subject matters that are still just as new to you as it is to the audience that's seeing it, which is bravery almost personified to a degree.
Right. Well, thank you. I guess I'm not thinking so much about being brave, and I'm also not even sure often if what I'm doing matters, but it matters to me, and I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if that needs to extend anywhere. I don't know. I don't have answers for anything beyond my own experience. And so being still alive, I guess my hope is to stay alive.
Well, I mean, there's a particular quote on that note that I find really compelling.
Right.
Again, talking more about now the desire to be a part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about the fact that you have been a photographer. Obviously, photography versus illustration versus painting, all these things are different, but still related, of course. And at the same time, you're saying in this quote, rather than taking snapshots, I draw a very quick and simplistic picture over and over again, until what I see is not just a passing experience, but an account of living in a body and a world that is ever changing faster and faster. It changes.
Wow. Did I say that?
Did. That's a David Haynes quote, 2022. Wow. Yeah. Live and direct. And, you know, you say that that you're not sure if there's bravery involved. And I would, again, politely push back on that and say that I would argue that being human is brave, and being human is not a conscious act, right? You were born human, and the brave part is getting up and doing it. And, you know, it's kind of like they say about the paratroopers in World War II. It's like, what is bravery? It's being afraid and going anyways, jumping out of the plane anyways. Right. And, you know, I
acting on your dharma, whether or not you understand it, so to speak. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, now as a kind of side thought, just like as somebody who ponders on the concept of like transmigration of the soul, it is arguable that there was consciousness involved in becoming you. I don't know if that's true or not. And maybe another side thought on that, maybe it doesn't matter, but you are you. So what does that mean to you? What is the demand that is coming from you through you, that your, so to speak, daimon is whispering to you or screaming at you, wanting you to listen? Or like this idea of you know, angels encouraging every blade of grass to grow. What is the encouragement that's coming to you, and are you listening? And I guess for me, listening has, at least it's felt like listening has been the only option. And that's been maybe a part of my story that I don't want to get into now, but has led me down darker paths in my life, because I didn't want to listen. And I didn't want to be me. But then now the question I have is not just who am I, but, you know, why am I me? Why is this consciousness me? And perhaps that's been a question that has led me, like, that's a question that keeps making new questions and new answers and new desires to study, to explore. And we live in such a rich world that, and I have the privilege of searching. And so perhaps that is a demand. It's a necessity, and to ignore it is maybe a crime. So arguably it's a crime against, I don't know, spirit,
yourself,
God, or whatever you want to call it.
I would argue yourself, David. I mean, again, to be able to switch into this new approach.
Yeah, and I think my older work came from a very negative place, and for me, I can't do that anymore.
Yep.
That's just been a part of my story.
And like you said, to create in the spirit of transcendence is a pretty profound thought.
Perhaps futile, but why not try?
But noble nonetheless.
You only have one life. Why not try?
This is true.
You
depending
only have
on
one life as you.
this
You
is,
only have one life as you.
yes.
So why not try? I don't know.
Yep.
That's
No,
maybe the question.
look, I have obviously had a very fortunate front row seat to the quote unquote prototypes of this new approach. And I think that the nobility of aiming for transcendence is real. And I also think that the, like you said, the dedication that you have had to embracing all of the various ways that you create, and yet having that kind of duty, I suppose, to your inner self to now debut this collection, this suite of work. And there's a real energy in what you've produced. There's a real vibrance in what you've put together here. And I can't wait to see it in the Catskills.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it too. No, I mean, the work is finished. So now it's just about choosing and hanging.
Well, it must be a very kind of peculiar and curious feeling to sort of reflect on as you sit right now, knowing that the work has been completed, and that you're now once again kind of back in the flow of movement now to the Catskills. So
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, the work that my level of like feeling like there's enough work to choose from to show is there, but the work never ends.
Of course. Of course.
The work never ends. You wake up and you do the work, or you don't. And that's living.
Agreed.
Cool, John. Always a pleasure.
David, look, I can't begin to thank you enough for just the winding path that you have allowed me to sort of ride shotgun on, and in terms of you putting a lot of these amazing things together.
Yeah, well, it's been an honor to have an observer, to have an audience. So
Well,
thank you.
you definitely have that, and like I said, I'm very thrilled and honored to be a part of the audience. You know, when the show debuts at Up in the Mountains. So you know, huge love and respect to you.
You too, John.
And let's talk soon.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right, man.
I'll see you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Bye. Ciao.